Now, it's funny. It's very funny, actually, when you think about how this whole thing has been playing out over time. I mean, it's almost, you could see a pattern here of how these aliens are, you know, what's been going on. You look at 1947 into the early 50s. You don't hear anything about humanoids, except for later on we hear about the crash at Roswell and there were bodies. Okay. So, okay, that's one thing, but you didn't hear about, there weren't people saying, hey, I saw this, in the late 40s, early 50s, you didn't really hear much about people seeing humanoids and landed UFOs and humanoids walking around, 3.5 foot, 4 foot tall beings with big heads. You didn't hear about that back in the, but then in the early 50s, as time moves on, you start seeing all these reports with not only, where there landed craft, and there was evidence that these craft had landed, but also you hear all these reports from multiple people, hundreds and hundreds of people all over the world, especially in France in 1954 for whatever reason, that there are, they're seeing these beings. They're not only are they seeing flying saucers, they're seeing flying saucers land, take off, and they're actually seeing, feet on the ground, boots on the ground, as you will. So you see the progression here, how this thing move forward. Basically, it starts off, there's a lot of sightings. They show up in force. It's almost like a show of force, basically. Kenneth Arnold sees a whole bunch of them flying all, like if they were at war, he's in 1947. That starts the whole thing off. So a lot of people saw, during that, when they first showed up in 1947, there was a lot of times where they would see multiple craft together flying in formation, apparently. And that went on into the early 50s. There was a lot of cases in the early 50s, and some of them have been caught on film with these things flying, and pictures. There were photographs taken. So it's interesting that you see how that progresses. Okay, it starts off for people are just seeing them. Then later on, a few years later, all of a sudden there's people, landed craft, people getting paralyzed, rays getting shot at them and they can't move. But then there's beings, they see them traipsing about and they get in their craft and take off. So then that happens, and then nobody really hears about this case. Everyone talks about the first case, the first abduction case that people talk about was 1961, Betty and Barney Hill. But however, there was one that happened in 1957 in Brazil. A guy, Antonio Villas Boas, was abducted, and and here's some of I could read some of the stuff here. It's on Wikipedia. This is the Villas-Boas story, and I'll leave a link for this Wikipedia article. I've read this article. I've read about this Villas-Boas and many books that I have. It's mentioned, but I will read this off Wikipedia here, so you get an idea of what this guy went through. At the time of his alleged abduction, Antonio Villas-Boas was a 23-year-old Brazilian farmer who was working at night to avoid the hot temperatures of the day. On October 16, 1957, he was plowing fields near São Francisco de Sal when he saw what he described as a red star in the night sky. According to his story, the star approached his position, growing in size until it became recognizable as a roughly circular or egg-shaped aerial craft with a red light at its front and a rotating cupola on top. The craft began descending to land in the field, extending 3 legs as it did so. At that point, Boas decided to run from the scene. According to Boas, he first attempted to leave the scene on his tractor, but when its lights and engine died after traveling only a short distance, he decided to continue on foot. However, he was seized by a 1.5-meter, 5-foot tall humanoid who was wearing gray coveralls and a helmet. Its eyes were small and blue, and instead of speech, it made noises like barks or yelps. 3 similar beings then joined the first in subduing Boas, and they dragged him inside their craft. Once inside the craft, Boas said that he was stripped of his clothes and covered from head to toe with a strange gel. He was then led into a strange semicircular room through a doorway that had strange red symbols written over it. Boas claimed that he was able to memorize these symbols and later reproduce them for investigators. In the room, the beings took samples of Boas's blood from his chin. After this, he was then taken to a third room and left alone for around a half an hour. During this time, some kind of gas was pumped into the room, which made Boas become violently ill. Shortly after this, Boas claimed that he was joined in the room. room by another humanoid. This one, however, was female, very attractive and naked. She was the same height as the other beings he had encountered, with a small pointed chin and large blue cat-like eyes. The hair on her head was long and white, somewhat like platinum blonde, but her underarm and pubic hair were bright red. Boas said he was strongly attracted to the woman, and the two had sexual intercourse. During this act, Boas noted that the female did not kiss him, but instead nipped him on the chin. When it was all over, the female smiled at Boas, rubbing her belly, and gestured upwards. Boas took this to mean that she was going to raise their child in space. The female seemed relieved that their task was over, and Boas himself said that he felt angered by the situation because he felt as though he had been little more than a good stallion for the humanoids. Boas said that he was then given back his clothing and taken on a tour of the ship by the humanoids. During this tour, he said that he attempted to take a clock-like device as proof of his encounter, but was caught by the humanoids and prevented from doing so. He was then escorted off the ship and watched as it took off, glowing brightly. When Boas returned home, he discovered that 4 hours had passed. Antonio Villas-Boas later became a lawyer, married, and had 4 children. He stuck to the story of his alleged abduction for his entire life. So there you go. That was before Betty and Barney Hill. That happened 4 years before Betty and Barney Hill. But again, you see the progression. And this guy didn't make this story up. This was not. Who the hell's going to go make it? This guy never made any money off it. He never tried to cash in on this story. He just said this is what happened and this is it, and you can take it or leave it. So it's interesting, though. Again, we get to the progression of how this whole thing has been unfolding over the decades. They show up in 47. Okay, in the early 50s, they started testing the waters on this planet. Obviously, checking things out. Pulling plants out of the ground and getting back in their ship. And any human get near them, they hit them or array. Okay, then by the late 50s, now that you're talking about, you're hearing stories like this, abduction, the Villas-Boas story, and then the early 60s, Betty and Barney Hill. They're getting abducted for whatever purpose, Is it a hybridization program? Who knows? It's all guesswork, and we really don't know. But it just goes on like this, and then, it's been progressing like this for years. I mean, it seems like it's been a progression. What's the purpose? Why have things happen the way they have? Okay, they show up, and then they get closer to us. Then they start abducting us. Now, what's next? What's next? Is there anything next, or is it just their curiosity, or are they using us for some hybridization program? Maybe it's not all of them. Maybe some of them are. Who knows? All of it could be true, but there could be things we can't even think of. What's going on here, or what's in store next. What's coming next from these things? I mean, how many are here? Are there bad ones? Are there good ones? I mean, there's some that want to get rid of. There could be some that want to get rid of us. Maybe there's some that there's some. This whole thing has been okay. We like this planet. Okay, this is a great planet. Okay, now we got to get rid of these humans. Is that the plan? Who knows? I'm sure there's some people in our government that might have some ideas on this, but they won't tell us anything at this point. But yeah, it's very interesting to see the progression of this. Okay, first, like I said, you see they arrive. Okay, before I even go further with what I'm about to say. Okay, yes, I acknowledge that there's been UFOs reported throughout the centuries. I mean, this has been going on before 1947. I mean, obviously, there's been things that show. There's UFOs that show up in paintings, flying saucers, in paintings, and it looks like there's aliens drawn by primitive man in caves. I mean, there's all kinds of things that's been going on apparently. So we might have been being visited and monitored for all those centuries. And then, of course, it's funny that 1947, only 2 years after we started playing with atomic bombs, they show up in force, apparently. Did that send a message out? This could be dangerous. This could, they're going to endanger themselves. They're going to endanger us if they keep progressing onto this violent course that they're on. who knows? I mean, it's funny how that not 2 years after the war ends. I mean, we had the Holocaust. Are they aware of the Holocaust? Are they aware of what the Nazis did? They probably look at that and say, "Holy moly! Look what these people will do to each other." And then, of course, the atomic bomb. The fact that we came up with the fact that we came up with atomic bombs. We invented that. We could become a problem. So then, and then they start landing. They start, checking things out. Then they start abducting us. And now it seems like, there's stuff all the time being, they're all over the place right now. There's flying all the time. I mean, you'll find a lot of them on the internet, but there's some things that just it can't be explained other than extraterrestrial. That's a simple fact. I mean, there are images that people are finding in NASA video and photographs, stuff that's taken by the government. You just can't. The government's not going to. Actually, they try to hide it when that happens. But and there's some things that are happening that are still happening that continue to happen. There are sightings all the time. There are many videos and pictures taken of these things. Mostly videos these days, actually. Some videos, of course, are going to be phonies. There's going to be a lot of people. I've seen it all over the internet. You can actually tell a lot of times the phonies. Some of them are hard to tell. But that in all those images and all those videos, that there's some real stuff in there. There's some real McCoys. Not everyone's making a business out of coming up with phony pictures of UFOs. No, that's just not how it works. I mean, that's just not how it is. I mean, a smart eye could look at videos and when somebody's pulling your leg. I mean, there's a lot of different groups out there on Facebook and whatnot, that other social media platforms, where people just post these videos that are plainly phony CGI. And then there's other things that this isn't CGI. This is somebody filming something with their cell phone. You can hear them talking in the background. There's other people there with their cell phones looking at them. Then sometimes you get from multiple angles, and so they're not phony. But yeah, what's next? What's next?